So this is G485 homework booklet question 25. Starts off by asking us to describe the process of induced nuclear fission. The key point with induced nuclear fission is it's not about neutrons going in and smashing apart the nucleus. Almost exactly the opposite. We start off by having a neutron being absorbed by the large nucleus, typically uranium-238. Doesn't really matter for the purpose of this question. But the neutron is being absorbed. The evidence that it's being absorbed rather than going in and smashing it apart is actually the fission happens more with slower nuclei, with slower neutrons, which we'll come back to later in the question. So a neutron is being absorbed by that large nucleus, and that nucleus, that new nucleus that we get from the nucleus with the absorbed neutron, that then splits into two, this useful phrase, daughter nuclei, and they did want this, and we get some neutrons off as well. Those neutrons are obviously important to then go off and become the neutrons that will go on and be absorbed by other nuclei to sustain a chain reaction. Explain how nuclear fission can provide energy. Two different ways of describing this. You can talk about it in terms of binding energy, so the binding energy of the particles is larger than the original nucleus, and that difference in binding energy is released as the energy of the reaction. A different way of going about that, which actually amounts to much the same thing if you think carefully about what binding energy is that there's a decrease in mass. Okay, so the mass of the products will be smaller than the mass of the original nucleus, and all taking into account all the neutrons each time, and that mass has been converted into energy at a rate of c squared for each kilogram of mass. So quoting delta E equals delta M at c squared. Either one of those two will get you the marks very nicely. And then we're asked to suggest a suitable material which can be used as a moderator in a fission reactor and explain its role. Really easy when the sort of second instruction is further on to miss that. Suggest a suitable material and explain. Careful reading of the question. Water or graphite, which you might describe as carbon. So water or graphite or carbon are the ones which are used as moderators. Be very careful, you might have got distracted by boron, which is used not as a moderator but within control rods to actually absorb neutrons, something different. So what's the point of the moderator? So explain the role. They slow down or reduce the kinetic energy of the neutrons, and that's simply by collision, elastic collisions. Some of that kinetic energy is passed on to the atoms within the moderator, and therefore the neutrons end up with less kinetic energy. Slow them down to what are referred to as thermal speeds, so the kind of energies that will relate to 3/2 kT. And explaining its role, what's the point of therefore of slowing them down, is those slower neutrons are much more likely to be absorbed by the undecayed nuclei. In other words, they're much more likely to induce fission. So that's G485 homework booklet question 25.